The properties of steel make it a superior material. Tensile strength, resistance to corrosion, only the hardest. Crazy shit, really. Listen to Living Proof Radio. The full experience on our Patreon. Thank you and good night.
First of all, thank you so much for allowing us here. Seeing your work is really, really sick. Seeing it in person, like we were saying, like in person is very different from seeing it online. You can't even tell the size sometimes online or like the depth of the actual painting itself. So thank you for allowing us here and, just speaking on the show. How long have you been living in Los Angeles for?
All my life, yeah.
And like what neighborhoods were you coming up in, and I guess what time and era?
The east side of LA, grew up in the San Gabriel Valley. And I guess the east side and San Gabriel Valley has its own feel. It's very, I guess, working class and different from maybe what you would see on a movie like Hollywood, Beverly Hills. I feel like every neighborhood in LA kind of has its own feel. Mm-hmm. But there's also like the peripheries, which I'm very familiar with, which is like the San Gabriel Valley, La Puente, Avocado Heights, Hacienda Heights. Just these areas that are not really places that you hear of, mm-hmm. but are very, I guess like not in the city, but LA County.
Yeah.
And in East LA, it's like, that's where I was born. And it's like primarily Mexican immigrant neighborhood. And really rich with culture and sort of even like developed like its own culture specific to that area.
So your family is from Mexico?
Yeah, my mom's from Guanajuato, a small ranch near Pénjamo, and my dad was raised in Tijuana, born in San Diego.
Oh, okay. And then why and when did they come over to America? Did they arrive first in LA or?
Yeah. So all my family pretty much moved to East LA, Boyle Heights, City Terrace area, and I think that was just sort of like a common thing. For a lot of people migrating from Mexico, it's kind of like I mentioned, it's like primarily Mexican neighborhood. So there's probably like support and other family and other people to make it feel comfortable. I mean, I have like aunts and uncles who have lived here for like 40 years who don't even speak English. So it's like a place where you could sort of get by and not really feel that culture shock, mm-hmm. I think. And but even on both sides of my family, like one of my grandparents are like, I think they're from LA or, so it's like they were here. It was like back in the day, it was way easier to be able to go back and forth compared to what it is now. Like I mentioned, my dad was born in San Diego, but at the time his family lived in Tijuana. Mm-hmm. So it was, I guess just like a comfortable area for people to be able to come and make a living, and it's like just like a lot of stories we hear of, like with people migrating to another country to make a living in a better life. Do
you remember what it was like, let's say when you're 5 years old or you're just super young and like seeing the state that like what was your family life like? What was your house like? Because a lot of people when they first move over here, it's tough. Coming from a different country, especially if like you don't speak the language, it's not the first language. Sometimes there's a culture shock, and it's just like my experience with it is that like my family's from Ecuador, and it's like over there they're like all the same people. You know what I mean? Like there's like this strange like connection when you see people, like that you have like a similarity to them. You can just like feel it. And coming to the East Coast, coming to New York, it's like you don't feel that no more unless you live in like the one neighborhood where all your people are at. Then you might just feel like I'm among strangers, you know what I mean? So I'm rambling, but like, so how was it for your family? How was it for your father and your mother?
I think so. By the time I was born, they had already been here for I don't know, a good amount of time. But from what I hear, it's not the easiest to be coming from somewhere else and, start, like even in state to state or city to city, like kids who move around from school to school, it's not an easy thing. But especially like from another country, different language. But then again, like I mentioned, there was other people in similar situations in this part of LA. But yeah, I think, like every city goes through waves, but, like in the 70s, maybe in 80s and 90s in LA, it was like very like, especially like in East LA, Boyle Heights, it was very like heavy gang influence. That's kind of like where a lot of that, like some of the earliest gangs in the country were born here, started here. So, yeah, I would imagine it wasn't the easiest thing to do. And like early on, like some of my memories, like as a kid, are like, hanging out with family. Like I lived in La Puente, but my family all lived like pretty much in like the East LA area. So I would, go shopping with my grandma or aunts and uncles and stuff like off Whittier Boulevard and these sort of areas that are just really almost feel like Mexico in a lot of ways. So especially during that time, and it like still very actually, like that's where I live and like where I work. So it's like very, still really has that feeling. But so I get, I would imagine if they moved to another part of the country or even the state, it would have been a different story. But it seemed to be, from what I know, yeah, like a comfortable thing in some ways, but maybe not like in school and stuff like that. Like some of like I'm sure, yeah, like just hearing like the stories of like, I guess like the dominance of like gangs during that time and like pressuring
So would you
family
say
members.
it's not like that anymore?
Like what?
In terms of the dominance of gangs?
Well, there's still very. I think it depends where you're at. I think there's been a lot of change with like the crackdown on like with the like the law enforcement really trying to crack down on gangs with like gang injunctions and enhancements on like, so say if you get arrested for something, but if you're a known gang member, which basically means like if I'm hanging out with say like a cousin or something and they're in a gang, just by me being around them, like you're like, they could profile you and like sort of like log you in the gang files stuff. So, but they've really like, cracked down on a lot of that. So basically it's like kind of hard to like loiter or hang out or be like out in public in that way. So a lot of it has sort of maybe gone underground, but it's still like really active and maybe not as obvious, like it's not like, like what you would imagine like someone to dress like in the 90s is not what they dress like now. They look like someone could be in a hood or like maybe not super active, but like still like doing whatever they do. So I wouldn't say that it's gone away. It's just like different. But like I said, I think it really depends on where, like even in the different areas I've lived or I live, it's like one block could be like if you grew up in this apartment building or this block or something, you would you could probably get pressured or whatever, like, but it's definitely not what it was.
Did you ever feel growing up that you were pressured to potentially join a gang, being of Mexican descent and growing up in these neighborhoods where that is present?
No, not really. I mean, I had friends who did it, and I didn't really feel like it was like you need to do this or you're not, No, I feel like I was able to like sort of navigate it in a way that, people understood that I was like had respect or whatever, but that's not really my thing, like it's like if you're like doing, skateboarding or doing other things, it's like, no, like that dude is doing
that's
this.
like what he does.
Yeah. So it's like, like, and if you're not like a knucklehead, maybe if I was like, like trying to be like some tough dude or something, it would be a different story, which I have, I've seen different things happen to different people that I know, but not like, can't really say that I felt that pressure. No.
What do you think about the gentrification in LA and the change that the city's undergone throughout your whole life of living here? I'm sure it's a lot different than what it was, you know. I have, like I was telling you, like no real experience out here, but so yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, it's it's happening everywhere, but it's like really obvious in LA. There's certain neighborhoods that you go to, and like Echo Park. It's like Echo Park was like mad hood, like really known for, and it still is, there's still shit that happens in that the hoods there are like definitely very active, but it's also like a place where you go and there's like like the like the coffee shops and like you see the people walking their dogs and doing their thing, and very super gentrified Highland Park, and just like these different neighborhoods that are going, that's happening, and even like Boyle Heights and stuff. It's like it's always unfortunate when people grew up somewhere and they feel like this, like your home, right? Like it's like your home and you can't like afford to live in your neighborhood, and because like some person from the Midwest thinks it's like and I'm not hating on people from the Midwest, or even like I'm not like, but like some of these things happen where it's like people get priced out and they're not able to like to like exist where they're from anymore, because like things become like hip and fucking the prices go up, and it's unfortunate, and it's like something that I have, especially like more recently in my life, since I've had the opportunity to travel, and even in the United States and around the world a little bit, coming back to LA, like I would always like see the change, and I think it's like a lot more, I think one of my perspective on how I see things really kind of comes from me, whether it was traveling on my own or working for different companies outside of California, coming back home and seeing like shit like drastically change, and then also seeing how like the new development is like similar to what I would see in like the Pacific Northwest or the East Coast, or maybe somewhere in Europe or something. And it's like really like, like that's really part like of the drive of what I'm doing with my work, and like the way I sort of like decide on what to focus on is like sort of preserving that culture, preserving the moment in time. It's like I'm very trying to just like capture what's going on right now in 2023 and like this moment, and like I think that change is inevitable, and I think hating on whether it's technology or this or that is like kind of like in a way not going to do much. And but I think that it's good for people to be aware, because I think a lot of people don't even think about things when they decide to, whether it's move into a neighborhood or like sort of like people that sometimes don't think about how their presence could really affect other people who maybe aren't as like don't have like the same opportunities and aren't as fortunate, but yeah, it's crazy to see like some areas more than others. I know you mentioned you were in East LA, and like kind of where the area that you were talking about is a little further east, and it's kind of funny because I live like in East LA proper, which is that area. A lot of people who aren't from here or kind of refer to like this general area as East LA, but East LA is kind of like this actual like place, and a lot of people maybe don't go that far east, so they're not so familiar. But like like Boyle Heights is right east of the river of downtown LA, so people go there, they get food, and they're like, oh, this is like interesting neighborhood, and how like this maybe affordable real estate or something. And But like these decisions really sort of like can really impact and influence and change people's lives and even like culture and cities.
Yeah, no, it's crazy because LA has its own culture. All the different neighborhoods have their own culture, but like how those came about, like for example, whether it be the gang culture in Los Angeles or the, I guess for lack of a better term, like the immigrant culture that exists, like of all these people from like another country coming and forming a community. It all happened like very organically because of a situation in their country. Then they come here, they start their own thing, and like now this type of like thing has been created, and that's kind of like what's happening right now. That's just like, I guess, the nature of a city, right? Like government officials come through, make some law, or maybe their rent is cheaper, so people not from Los Angeles, they're like, have some appeal to it. They come through, and before you know it, like it kind of sucks, but then like a whole new culture has been formed, and the old one like might be erased, might not, but it's not going to be the same thing. Like I think about that with New York a lot. Like at what point is New York not New York? You know what I mean? Or maybe even LA. Like at what point is LA like lost what made it LA? Does it ever get to that point? How do you deal and cope with this thing of gentrification or just the changing of a city? Because it doesn't even have to be gentrification, but just the changing of a city. Of course, you're documenting it in your work and stuff, but yeah, how would you say you deal with that?
Well, how I do, I mean, yeah, like making work about it, but also like having conversations like this and just like also understanding that like a city like LA is like fairly new, like New York, that's old, like you see buildings that have been there for a really, really long time. And like if you go to Europe, it's like fucking like way older. So like I said, like change is inevitable, but I think that like, like, but these nuances and like these, whether it's like affordable rent for like immigrant people to start businesses or this and that, that's like what creates culture. So I think it's very important to preserve, because like we don't need a fucking Apple store or an Applebee's or a fucking coffee shop to replace these things that are like what, like this old restaurant or whatever, like these like certain like staples that are super important. Like we don't like I'll go to, if I want that, I'll go to like the place where I could get that generic thing, but yeah, like I said, like people might not be aware and or people just kind of like navigate the world in like a very selfish way, but also maybe people don't even think about it. It's like I'm not like hating on like I don't know, like like yes, it's bad, but like just like everything else, it's like it's not like black and white. I'm not like gonna say like things need to change, they stay exactly the way they are, like I'm against change. Like no, like that's ridiculous. I think it's like everything's gonna change. If you look at photos of any major city, but especially LA, like there's like these like just looking online, like it's like every 10 years shit looks like very different. Every 20 years or even like 100 years ago, like it wasn't as like developed as it is now. And like even the skyline of like the buildings, it's like you're coming from New York, it's very tiny compared to that. But like if you look at 10 years ago, it's way, way more developed, and like these big skyscrapers and stuff like that are here, and yeah, I mean, I think it's like, it's a very appealing place to move. It's like great weather, like you see like the movies and the fucking Malibu, beautiful ocean, and fucking Hollywood, and all these like influencer and TikTok kids and shit. Like, of course, like, yeah, it's not like I get why people are attracted to it. Obviously, I love it, but I think sometimes people need to be aware and just think a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Are you trying to accomplish anything in specific with your work? Do you have a specific audience in mind? Is that something that you're thinking of consciously?
I mean, yeah, it's funny because like I never like the work I'm making or the like I you know as an art I've always made art and I've always been like had some sort of practice and never really like had that thing in mind of like an audience or like who's gonna see this or this and that. And of course, like in recent years, that's changed. But like one thing that I've done a lot of like commercial like painting and sign painting and work for other people as like to make a living and stuff. But with my own work, I've always sort of done it for myself. You know, I never really want like to have people dictate whether it's like, you know, like whether it's like the market, like whether it's like something that is sellable. Like if someone likes something, it's like I'm not going to continue to make that just because I know I could sell it. Like if I really enjoy making it and if I feel like it's important to my what I'm doing, I'll do it. But like, yeah, I never really made work with an audience in mind. But you know, as I continue to sort of like focus full time on my art practice and sort of like, I guess, more people find out about my work. I have had really good conversations with whether it's younger people or people from, I guess, similar sort of like upbringing and background who are really like I guess, just really like enjoy and could relate to what I'm doing. Cause you know, like I'm sure everyone, even like, you know, like artfuls, like everyone has gone into like a museum or a gallery and really felt unwelcome. It's kind of like, oh shit, like who's this fancy ass person like at the front desk, or who's this, like what the fuck does this like thing mean? It's very like, it's almost like you read the wall text and it's very uninviting and it's very like huge words and you're like, shit, like I just read that thing, I have no idea what that means. That must maybe mean this isn't for me, or I'm not smart enough to understand this work, I'm not cultured enough, I'm not this or that. But I think like my work is like very like, I think everybody could get something out of it, or at least like somehow relate it to like an experience that they've had. It's very like easily understandable, but I think like I also try to think about it in a way of like with history and just kind of like just like in conversation with a lot of different things, whether it's like, you know, cultural history, art history, just like the way of making it, the craft, the process, all these things in mind.
Why do you think that that it is that way? Why do you think that, like, for example, in a museum or sometimes in a gallery, there is that thing where it's like you feel like maybe this isn't for me. This is like you said, some fancy stuff. There's this description that I don't really understand. I like the way this thing looks. However, like, what does it mean? Am I just a fool? You know what I mean? Like, why do you think there's that thing?
I think there's probably various reasons. One of them is maybe to exclude people, to make it like, you know, like if you write this like crazy thing about it, it kind of proves the value of it. You know, like a lot of conceptual work, which I like, but you know, like if you look at like Duchamp's Urinal, which, you know, like a very famous, important work, it's like an average person will see that and be like, what the fuck? Like, what is this? Like, why, you know? But like, if you hear the reason behind, you know, the work, you're like, oh shit, that's actually really smart and really like that, like this moment changed art forever. And, but I think it's like to create like importance, to add value. And also I think like exclusivity is like something that sells and something that is like, you know, that makes things important. And if it's like you're like an average person, like, you know, throughout history, if you look at what art has been, whether it's like, well, you know, like the patrons are like very wealthy people and kings, and a lot of like the old masters were like very like basically funded by like the like kings and these dynasties that were allowed them to be artists. So like the people who were funding it were like, this is just for us, you know, like this, they're like up until like, you know, more recently in history has there been art for like different people. But yeah, like, or even like the people being able to have an art practice that's not funded by like these very powerful families throughout history. So it's like kind of just to, you know, like just so like even that history of how art has always well, for hundreds and maybe thousands of years, it operated in a certain way. And then now with like these very like prestigious institutions and museums and these like mega galleries that are like, you know, like if you get like a crumpled up piece of paper and throw it in a corner, and like these mega galleries and museums are like, this is important, then it's going to like maintain that value in some ways, you know. But, you know, like just like everything else in the world, whether it's like the music industry or just whatever, like with, I guess, like the internet and access to information and social media, like a lot of these things are changing. And even like the awareness of people understanding that like there's been like a large percent of the population excluded from these very important conversations in art history. You know, it's like even what's going on right now with the new interest in art in LA and like these different like artists of color. It's like, wow, like, you know, like post George Floyd, all of a sudden all these like collections and museums want to collect you know, artists of color's work. But it's like, or even just like people in LA, they're like, wow, it's so interesting, all the new energy coming out of, you know, this area in LA. And it's like, actually, no, like it's always been here, but it just was never really kind of like looked at. There's like, I could, you know, think of like so many important people that were kind of excluded from the conversation because they didn't get the stamp of the, you know, the Yale MFA or like the MoMA or like whatever, these like things that people look at as being like the highest level of like the, you know, the thing. It's like just because they didn't go through that channel, like maybe sometimes they get like looked over. But, you know, like now it's like, I think it's easier for people to see, like if something's good or interesting, there's going to be people who find it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that brings to my mind Leo Fitzpatrick's gallery in New York, Public Access.
Yeah.
Just the name, Public Access.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Super important.
You know, that's one. And then two, another thing that came to my mind while you were saying that was the like graffiti. Because I feel like in recent years, you know, to me and you and other people, graffiti's always been ill. But like in recent years, it's garnered a lot of attention from fashion, from just mainstream. And one of the things that kind of did is, well, not necessarily because of that, but you see like what's possible. You see that people from all different backgrounds can actually do something pretty sick and can be a part of like the fine art and gallery world. And I think that there's almost no community like better to show that like, yo, like this is us and like this is what we can do than the graffiti community. Like you see people like Revoke or Rhyme or Espo or KR or even like a graffiti adjacent communities like Peter Sutherland. You know, like these people coming from these backgrounds and coming from their upbringing and being from all different types of ethnic backgrounds as well, and really like doing it. And I think that leads to, you know, public access because it's made more by like the people who are your neighbors. It's made more by like people who you can relate to. It's made more like a big thing for me was I saw a Thrasher magazine article on Andrew Barnes, and I absolutely like immediately was like, yo, this is a different style of painting. Like I thought classical oil painting was only about like some crazy king that would be like, you know, postured up with like a wig on and shit.
Yeah.
Surrounded by riches. And here's like some graph references. Like, do people reading this magazine like know what this is?
You are listening to Living Proof Radio, a radio show and magazine supported by Art Primo, a graffiti shop like no other that has been proudly serving the community from New York to Seattle and beyond. Mops, ink, paint, sketchbooks, markers, and much, much more. Artprimo.com.
And I started realizing what is possible. And I'm sure that other people have had that, not just with his work, but like with yours or with people like, oh, painting can actually be this, or art in general can actually be this. And this dude's kind of like me. Like, this dude's a skateboarder, or this dude's a graffiti writer. Like, I don't have to be some wicked, like, I don't know, whatever kind of person to make this. Like, I can actually do this. And like, you know, I think that that's something that's super important. So in that talk, you came up writing graffiti. How did you get involved with writing graffiti? When did you become aware of it? And yeah, just what's your experience with that?
I think it's one of the earliest memories I have is just seeing, like, I think particularly gang graffiti, which is like a specific style in LA. It's like very aggressive and really kind of like sharp in a lot of the times, and really has like this presence, you know. And it's like, wow, like these letters that someone did illegally, or like really kind of like almost like that are marking a territory or something, are very like very, you know, like it's crazy that could like make you feel something, like almost like as a little kid, like fear, like, wow, like who did that? Why do they do that? How do they do that? What does it mean? And like, where are they at? Like, are they around the corner? Are they watching me right now? I don't know. You know, just like being a kid, it's just like, what is that? You know, like, and coming up in the, like being a kid in the 90s and seeing, you know, the gang graffiti, but also sort of like the era of graffiti in LA during that time. It's like, you know, like Air, a lot of like the MSK, LTS, IFK, CBS, like just kind of like these like the spots that they were painting, or there's, you know, like LA graffiti is known to do crazy spots, right? Like ledges and like these, like just driving in the freeway, just as a kid seeing like these ledge spots or like highway signs. Like, how the fuck do you do that? Like just trying to imagine like how someone did that. And especially like during that era, there was like, you know, GK spots and stuff, but like full like burners on like this crazy ledge. And it's like, whoa, like what is that, you know? And then yeah, it was like being a young kid and like kind of like didn't have access to the internet. It was like kind of, well, there was internet, but it was pre-internet, and there wasn't really, or at least I wasn't aware of like any, like, well, I didn't have a computer, but yeah, so it's just kind of like this like underground thing that you had to know or like find out or figure out. And I have a cousin who's like a like OG like LA graph writer. You know, he used to like tagging buses was like the thing in the 80s and early 90s, and he was really into that. But like kind of like seeing what he was into, you know, it's like always like your older cousins or family members who early on influence you and stuff. But yeah, he had, you know, just like graffiti magazines and black books and markers, and was into hip hop and like was like listening to like just crazy shit, you know, was really into like East Coast like hip hop and stuff like that. So like early on I was like that was like an access point to like figure out what that world was. And it was like really, you know, as a kid sort of like interesting to yeah, just like figure it out. Like you meet one person, they're like, yo, like this is how you rack, and meet another person, this is how you do scribes, and this is like a fat cap, and like little by little just like learning about like this like underground thing, that like this underground like illegal thing. And but you know, like it's really hard to imagine I basically doing most of the things I'm interested in life without that influence. You know, I think graffiti is like, there's a lot you could learn from it. It's like confidence, you know, it's like you see someone do like a piece and you're like, how does that happen? And then throughout time, like if you do little things here and there, you could figure out how to do things. And it's like that, you know, it's like and then you get the confidence of, it's like same with skateboarding. It's like, you know, like you try to ollie and then you figure it out, and then you kick flip and do whatever. And then eventually like you gain like, you're like, damn, I could actually do something, you know, like it takes time, but that's like a very important thing to learn as a young person, where it's like, not everything's just going to be handed to you. It's like a process of being committed and a process of like being passionate. And as a kid, it's like there's not that many things, or I mean, I guess everybody finds their avenue, you know, like I never was into sports and I didn't really care about video games or whatever. I mean, I love skateboarding and I was never good at skateboarding, but I think skateboarding is like just like such an amazing thing where, like I was saying, it's like you try a trick, you might not land it, but you're like, if you're persistent, you could get better. And it's also like with these like graffiti skateboarding, it's like a very great way of sort of like navigating and like the way you visually see a city, you know, like a skater like drives around and like, oh shit, that's a spot right there. And same with the rider, you know, and you sort of like start looking at the city in a specific way and start noticing architecture and start noticing surfaces and sort of like, oh, I'm not going to skate that spot because, you know, it has like that rail has a kink, or like, you know, like that's a buff spot, or like that wall is going to fuck up the nib of this marker or mop or whatever. Like these certain things of like, you pay attention to like the texture, you know, you can't skate a certain spot that is, if the texture's fucked up or if like there's like dirt or something, you know? So it's like that, you know, like I'm really like in my practice really looking at zooming into texture and architecture and sort of like the way the city's laid out. And it's kind of like coming from like looking and observing. It's like all observing, but it's like for looking at these things since I was a child, you know, it's like years in the making of just like me just really paying attention and you know, like I haven't really skated like in years, but I still like see dope spots and I'm like, damn, it's a sick ass spot. And I think it's something that kind of like stays with you.
So how do you think coming up within Los Angeles and observing the graffiti and all of this, it's like LA for graffiti is a very unique city. You see a tag from LA and you just know it's from LA, and just the way that LA writers approach graph is very unique as well. For me, like when I come out here, one of the biggest, most impactful things is like the stompers, the huge rollers. Like they really make a good use of the spot. How did coming up seeing that influence you and the work that you do today as well? Because I see that in your work there's graph in the background, and a lot of it will be like, you know, more gang style graph in like the style that they do it. So how does it influence your work today?
Yeah. Well, like you said, LA has a very specific style. I'm really like sort of like a lot of the way I think about things is like, well, like my work is focused on Southern California and LA, and yeah, it does reference like the styles that come from here, you know, like I think a lot about like kind of what we were talking about, how like the city changes and how sort of like, even like how the internet changed everything, right? It's like a lot of things used to be regional, and that like you could very obviously see it in like styles of graffiti, like, you know, like Philly hand styles this way, and then like the way that people write in LA is this way, and SF it's this other way, and New York is this other way. Same with like music, you know, there used to be like this, the way they rap in LA is this way, in New York, and it's still kind of that way, but it's like it's now we could see what's going on around the world with the internet, which kind of like is a good thing in a lot of ways, because it's like you have access to like things that are maybe you find interesting, but it also sort of eliminates, or a lot of like, I'm just kind of interested to see how like eventually how like this way of like regional styles is going to change and shift. But yeah, in my work, I do sort of like, graffiti is a big part of it, but not so much like the hip hop style graph. I mean, I love that. I'm very influenced and inspired by it, but you know, like I'm like looking or thinking or more about like civilian or like gang graffiti, whether it's like a tweaker writing some crazy shit somewhere. Like what I'm looking at in my work is how a community changes and influences a surface, you know, and sometimes it is like maybe like a random LA tag banging crew who kind of like fucks up this surface so much. It's like this beef of like layers. You see that a lot in cities, like particularly LA, because there's so many like little like crews, and then they're just like beefing, and then they just fucking like eventually like these layers create this almost abstract work, you know, like yeah, like when I first started really kind of paying attention to contemporary art and traveling around the country and world, I made an effort when I was working in New York to visit every major museum, and going into their the museum's collection, I started like seeing like a Rothko or like a, I don't know, Cy Twombly or something, or just like these different people. Like I'm like, that's kind of like a hand style, or like that's basically like big buff marks. I didn't know what their work was about. I mean, I know now, but like when I first started seeing it, I saw like whether it was like pop art, I'm like, that's like sign painting. I get that. Like I do that. And like this other thing is like this, but it's not that. They're expressing their whatever, like they have their reason for doing what they're doing. But for me, through a lens of how I grew up in my history, I started like being like, wow, like, like I should just do it. Like they're not thinking about it in this way, but I am. So like I should just make that work. Because that's like who I am in my history, and yeah.
What was the process like from your early beginnings, working in art and making art, into becoming a full-time artist? I know you were doing sign painting for a while. You've been like an assistant, an apprentice, and your studio used to be in your laundromat. So just all of that into like where you are today. Could you take me through that?
Yeah, I've always like made art in whatever way, whatever capacity. It's just like something that has always just been part of my life. My dad's a sign painter, so like, and he's interested in art. He was in LA during the Chicano art movement, like a lot of murals, and really inspired by like Mexican muralists and stuff like that. So I always like, he had books on that sort of stuff, and even like books and magazines on sign painting, which was, growing up, it was like super obscure. It was pre like the sign painter movie and sign painter book that came out maybe in 2012 that sort of like exploded that. Like it became a lot more popular, especially with like graffiti writers and stuff. But before that, like not a lot of people really knew about sign painting. But yeah, like I said, I've always been had some sort of art practice, whether I thought about it in that way or not. And during high school, after high school, well, I was a really bad student. I never really clicked with the way, like any of those structures. I always got in trouble. Just really did really bad in school. So I wanted to go to art school, but I wasn't able to because of like grades or the whole school thing. And then also like financially, it just wasn't a thing. So I went to LA Trade Tech that has a sign painting program, and you don't really need any sort of credentials. You could just go and sign up. It's a community college trade school, and it's really sick. It's like a lot of working class people go there. They do like plumbing, welding, like just like a trade, which I think is very important. But I went there and learned, like kind of took the sign painting program, and then started painting signs, and lived in the Bay for like a little bit, like a year, trying to like hustle my shit. Since I got out of high school, I've always kind of had creative jobs through sign painting, or just kind of like just hands-on. I'm kind of really bad at like technology and computers, but like any sort of hands-on thing, I could kind of like figure out a way to do it. And so like, yeah, outside of like being in the Bay, being in the Bay really taught me like, I'm like, it was like a big eye-opener, because like I'm like trying to get work and realizing that I kind of suck at a lot of different shit. Or not that I suck, but I guess it's everybody, but like especially me, like it's like if I don't like it, I'm not gonna care or do it, or I'll just like say fuck it, But like just trying to pursue my own sign painting career. And then I had a friend who worked with the company painting large outdoor advertisements in LA. So it's like hand painted billboards, like in the company that he worked with painted really large, like 16, 20 story buildings. And I began working with them as like a apprentice, basically just carrying heavy shit up on the roof and painting walls white and putting up patterns. And then through that, I was just around like really experienced, skilled painters who could basically like recreate any image. And then eventually started working with another company who does that in New York, and they do work all over the country. So for like a few years, I was working a lot in New York and working all over the country, pretty much every major city, sort of like working with different crews and sometimes leading groups of people to paint an ad. And that was really important. Like leaving LA, whether it was like early on or like through work, was like really important because I kind of was like around other people different than me. Like I realized like, damn, like a lot of the people I grew up with are a certain way naturally, right? Like all of us. But like leaving and going around people from like Portland or New York or I don't know, just wherever, I'm like, damn, and like other people, like random like white kids and shit. It was like different for me. But it was also like good for me to just like be around. It sounds like super basic, but like, yeah, I just realized like shit, like I was able like to like, I guess like build relationships and friendships and just see how other people live in other places, and sort of even being comfortable talking to people, and even working with like big companies and like leading groups of people or them leading me, and just working with other people. And then also like while I was working with these companies, just trying to figure out how they run their operations. That's kind of like always something that's like interesting to me, just seeing how like people scale what they're doing or just like run their business, you know. And yeah, but I was doing that, but I was working, like I mentioned, for a company based out of New York and always on the road. There wasn't that much work in LA, which was amazing, especially because like I love experiencing new cities, traveling. But after, you know, doing that for a few years and coming to LA for like 1 or 2 days and then going back on the road for 2 weeks, coming back for like 5 days and then going back on the road. And during that time, I started going to like a lot of museums and really kind of try to figure out like what the whole art thing was, you know, or just, yeah, like I kind of got tired of like drinking or going to different cities. I would link with different people to maybe paint at night and stuff. So it was like kind of really exhausting, you know, like partying or like staying up all night. So I'm like, well, let me see what these cities have and like go just explore by myself. And a lot of that is museums. And like I mentioned, I started like just like learning about like very basic art history and seeing the connections and sort of relating them to what I do. And then I was like, well, fuck, like, you know, I've always sort of like identified as an artist and until like, then I realized, you know, meeting new people and like homies being like, oh, he's an artist. And then they're like, oh, let me see your work. And I'm like, fuck, like, I don't want to show you this like Coke ad I just did. Like, I don't give a fuck about this Airbnb fucking advertisement I just painted. Like, I'm actually embarrassed of this shit. This shit's like really corny and I hate advertisement. But I, you know, like I had to make a living, so I'd rather do that than do some other shit. And also was learning a lot. But, you know, after maybe I was doing that kind of work for maybe like close to at least 8 years, probably like almost 10 years. And yeah, eventually I think I had a week off in LA. And it was like, I was kind of trying to start making my own. I was already making my own work. It was like when I was like, all right, I need to finish a few works a year, because it was like maybe like a couple years that I didn't make any art of my own. I was painting every day, but I didn't make any art of my own. So yeah, I was just like, fuck, like I really just wanted to try to see what I could do. And I had like a week off, which was super rare. I had never had a week off. But for some reason, this like 1 week slowed down. And I was just at my house, which everywhere I've always lived, I've kind of tried to have like a zone, like an area to make art. And sometimes more than others, I used it. But I had like a tiny little space in the back of the house that I still live in. And it's like a laundry room, but I didn't have a washer or dryer. So it was like my studio space. And I just started like really just taking the time to make my own work. And by the time it was time to go back to work, I'm like, fuck, like this is what I need. And I was like always like concerned with like making a living, just like, I think most people are. It's like, how do you like get the time to be creative when you just need to make a living? Like you just got to pay rent. Like you don't have time to think of all the extra shit, but that's just like always like an essential part of like me and who I am. And I think I neglected it for a long time. And so like the moment that I was able to like just focus on making my own work, I realized that that's what I wanted to do. So gratefully by that time I knew enough people who were sort of like doing their own side things. And I was just like, fuck, like I had just gotten a huge raise and promoted, and and then I realized like the only reason I was doing what the other thing was to like make a living, try to save money, like try to do this thing. But at the same time, it wasn't really like fulfilling at a point. I mean, it was definitely, I'm super grateful. Like I'll never like talk down on that, but I think it hits a point where it's like, I wasn't happy. So like, yeah, after like I realized when I had the opportunity to do my own thing, I'm like, I don't care if like I go broke or like if I have to figure out something, I'm just going to like quit that job. And then gratefully I was able to work for a friend who does similar work, but it was like one job a month. So like 1 week out of the month, or maybe a week and a half or two, but it was way easier, and I could focus on, and he paid a little better, and I could focus on like just making art and trying to figure out like that, and yeah, like I said, I never thought like people would be interested or want to buy it or like want to show it, there was no opportunities, like the first ways I was able to show art was by me organizing art shows and putting friends in it. Like I organized like friends had like a studio space, and there was like an area where they sort of like did small exhibitions. It's not like a commercial gallery, it's just like a DIY things, but coming from like graffiti and punk and hip hop and these sort of things, like I'm used to like the DIY thing. Like all we need is like what we do, and just invite your friends and make it happen, which is something that I still really try to do now. Like I really want to like encourage people to like, you don't need to wait for the curator or the gallery or the collector or like these people that we give value to, that they think sometimes that are like important. Like we don't need that. Like the most important cultures and art and things happen just amongst ourselves, and we have the power to do it. Like we don't even need to do it in a space. Like if anybody's like making work and wants to like show it, all you got to do is find like a dead end street, post up your work and invite homies, promote it online or text people, email people, like come check out my shit. And, I still really like try to keep that alive and going, cause like, yeah, like we can't give people that much power, but basically, yeah, like I just decided to like push my practice and just really focus on that. And like after a few years, eventually like people are like, hey, Nimi, what's up? Like I was like I mentioned, I organized my shows and threw in a few works and had other friends, and the other homies were like, you want to throw something in this? You want to throw something in that? Cool. Yeah. Like little by little, like a few times a year. Then eventually people are like, hey, what's up with that work? Is it for sale? And I'm like, oh shit. Yeah. Like how the fuck do you price something like selling something for a few $100 or $1,000? That's like mind blowing, at first. But like, yeah, like, but I think also by me sort of like, I'm super grateful in a lot of ways that I didn't go to art school or I didn't start off. I had this whole other life experience before I like jumped into like me having my own art practice, where like I kind of knew myself and I kind of had like life experience, and I also like had an understanding of like the exchange of like, for years I made a living by painting, right? So like this idea of like this exchange was kind of like not super foreign to me compared to other people, but I felt like I had to overcompensate by like doing a lot of research. I read like or listened to like audiobooks on like how the art world or the art market or this or that, because like I approached it through a very like practical way. Like a lot of MFA students, they don't teach you that in school. That's like this whole part that maybe some schools do, but like from what I hear, it's like this whole part of like the art school part that's missing, where it's like, okay, like what's the practical shit? How do you make a living? Like, what's a bad way of doing it or a good way, or who's like what like this? It's like this whole crazy like world that nobody is even super open to talking about. It's like unregulated and secret and fucking, it's weird. So like I try to figure that shit out, and I don't think anybody ever figures it out. But yeah, I kind of like approached it in that way, and eventually was like there was some interest, and then I was able to move into like a studio with other artist friends, which is very important because I'm able to have those conversations and ask questions. I think asking questions, I ask everybody questions. Like, since I didn't know shit, I'm like, okay, so like tell me about, how do you talk about your work and how do you go about selling it, and just like asking friends questions. But not only artists, like the gallerists, art dealers, curators, just like ask like mad questions. And I don't know, like now it's like kind of like moving, and I'm able to make art full time, and that's like all I do. And it's crazy. It's like a dream come true. But it's like years in the making. It's like I think like everything I've done in my life, like the ups, the downs, the dark moments, and like I like the moments where I was mad broke and just like, fuck, I got to figure something out, or like feeling like, yeah, just like all like the fucked up shit led me to like this, and without those really like, without me feeling like I'm an idiot or like a fuck up or being broke or all these things, like without that, like I don't think I would have the drive to really like hustle and push my shit.
Damn, that was awesome. Yeah, I think that's very inspiring, honestly. Like, I was inspired listening to it, and especially the idea of you can't be giving these like groups of people, or like essentially like authority figures in the art world, too much power, because at the end of the day it is about like you, and it is about like us, and it is about the public who's going to see this and feel some type of way about it, rather than like people who are gonna let you know that you're valid. You know what I mean? Like, why are you letting me know anything? Like, why don't I just let you know something? Or like, why don't I just decide for myself? And that gives like people more power. You know what I mean? That gives everybody power, because you realize like it's you and your homies or you and your crew that's going to make it happen. And I think that that's something that, you didn't go to art school. You kind of got it from the ground up, learned as you went along. And there's no real like set path. It's just day by day, and then everything leads to where you're at now. So I think it's awesome that you're at where you're at now, because it's very unique to you, very unique to your own path and your own style and everything that you've been through. What's coming up?
So right now I'm in the early stages of figuring out the next, solo presentations and group shows. So there's a lot in the works, but it's still pretty early to announce, or kind of like there's no set dates yet. So yeah, but there's a lot in the works, and I'm really excited and grateful, and yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for speaking on the show and telling us about your story and your life path. Like I said, very influential and gets me pumped. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Peace.